car, just listen to that. That's what it's all about. A couple of weeks ago, Tom was kind of nice enough to invite me here for cars and coffee, and I'm like walking through his workshop. And Tom Papadopoulos, who runs Autosport here, is probably one of the most knowledgeable guys if it comes to like 80s and 90s Aston Martins on the East Coast, if not in the States. And I see that this 6.3 liter is parked right there, and I'm like all over it. And I walk more around the thing, and I go downstairs where there are more cars, and there I see the 6.3 liter Virage. And I can't believe it. It's so rare to like encounter one of them anyway. They rarely come up for sale. So it's not that you can just like go out and buy one. I mean, you'll have to wait one shows up somewhere. And to have two of them together under one roof. And then I look at the specs and I see, wow, they're actually both black on black. Black leather inside, black outside. And I thought like, okay, I need to talk Tom in letting me drive them and letting me shoot them. Carbureted 6.3 liter Aston versus fuel injected 6.3 liter Aston. Tom, who let me drive certain cars in the past, eventually said, let's do it. And here we are with the awesome Aston Martin Vantage from the late 70s and early 80s. Aston Martin introduced the V8 back in the late 60s, 68 with the DBS. Subsequently, the bodywork was upgraded in the early 70s to, get that quintessential iconic shape, which it basically kept all the way to 89 when the production series ended. It was a great car, people loved it, it has power, was a great cruiser. But after a couple of years, they felt that they want to give it a little bit more oomph. They used to have Vantage versions in the past, a little bit hotter, and so they created the V8 Vantage. That came out in 1977. The regular V8s came in with like about 300 horsepower, so now the engine was reworked. It got like big 48 size Weber carburetors, got all kinds of things done to it. And horsepower output came up to 380. The car got much faster, and so they had to also make the chassis stiffer, adjustable Coney dampers, bigger roll bars, shorter spring rates, all that kind of stuff, which gave the car more holding on the street. But they also added a big front air dam. They blanked off the grille to force all the air underneath the car into the coolers and into the radiators to reduce the drag as much as possible. And they also wanted to add some downforce in the back. So on the, kind of like down-sloping rear boot, they bolted a spoiler on top. Also, the scoop on the hood used to be open, and they just like closed it off with a little piece, because underneath was a big air box to feed the air all into those big carburetors. And when they were done, the car actually ended up going basically 170 miles an hour. And that was in 1977. It made the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest road-going production car in the world, and was officially Britain's first supercar. Despite this being basically a muscle car, like a big GT, engine at the front, rear-wheel driven, seats in the back and all of that, kind of large size, still a number of road testers in the days found the car to have superior performance over his rivals at the time, which were the Lamborghini Countach, the Ferrari 512 BB, and the Porsche 911 Turbo. From the early conversion where they closed the hood and like bolted on the spoiler in the back and so forth, only a few were made. After that, they started to work the changes in a little bit better. The hood was still closed, but it was all welded in and polished in and looked neat. And the same with the spoiler on the back. It was not bolted anymore. It was welded on and blended into the boot lid. And those cars are known as the so-called flip-tail Vantages, because there were only like a handful of them. I mean, I think 16 of the bolt-on and then maybe 25 of the welded-on. And after that, the whole back end of the car was reworked aerodynamically and got different shape. So what we have here is one of those early flip-tail Vantages. And this is a 1977 car, one of the first one which came out. When they were exported to America and Canada, of course, there was the problem with emissions, like there always is with America and Canada. So they sent cars over which basically looked like Vantages, had like flip tail, had the spoiler, had the blanked off grille and all of that, but not really the performance. I don't want to call it a cheat, but it was a little bit of a cheat. So, the cars came here, they figured, okay, they don't have highways where they can go 170 miles anyway, so it's like, whatever. This is one of those cars. However, later in life, this car came to Autosport and upgraded to full Vantage specs and 6.3 liter. Now, as the Vantage progressed through the year, it became better and better, and once it arrived at the end of its life cycle in 1989, there was a so-called X-Pack version, which had bigger bore, everything, and it packed around 435 horsepower. Those were like awesome cars. I mean, the engines were like just incredible, the sound, the punch. I was lucky enough to have one in Europe and were able to drive it actually on the Autobahn and go flat out and push Porsches out of the way, or like new BMWs and Mercedes at the time. In my mind, like one of the most awesome driving experience ever. However, for the very crazy Aston Martin people, there was always something a little more. And the late Richard Williams, who used to run Aston Martin's race department in the late 70s and the early 80s, he used the base of the V8 to actually race at Le Mans, heavily modified of course, but the same quintessential engine. And he had opened it up to 6.3 liter, and eventually one of those 6.3 liter made it into a Vantage. Rumor had it that was like the holy grail of the experience. There are only a few around, like nobody knows exactly how many. Anyway, Richard Williams designed the engine and put it into a Vantage. Work service department loved it so much that they bought the rights to build the engine from him, and then they offered the 6.3 liter version of the Vantage in-house, built by Aston Martin. In the end, it was not so much fun for Richard Williams because he didn't get to do the upgrades anymore because Aston Martin was making them in-house. So he figured, okay, I'm going to up them one more. And he built a 7 liter. When you look at the engine base, you can distinguish them. The regular engines look like, aluminum, silver, gray. The 6.3 have a black finish, and his 7 liter, the Richard Williams 7 liters, has a green finish. Having such huge cylinders made the car not wanting to rev so much anymore. Bottom end torque, like forever, really cool. And I had a chance to drive one of those back when I lived in England. You think like a hand grabs your ass and lifts you forward. It's a different sensation. It was kind of like over the top. So the rumor still stands that 6.3 liter is the sweet spot. When the V8 series came to an end, they built it from 73 to 89. It was quite an old car by that. It had been developed further and further. There was a Vantage iteration, there was a 6.3 liter, and at the end there was a Zagato version, which was even lighter. The final model really, it was like a crazy, fast, powerful car. The Virage came in 1990, and it was just like the regular base model, of course, to begin with. Because of all the emission laws around the world, power was down to 330 horsepower. While 330 is in itself like a nice number compared to like a Mercedes 500 SEC or something like that, or Jaguar XJC, 12-cylinder. It was a potent car. However, for the people who were used to Aston Martins, people like repeat buyers who had V8s before, who ordered the car blind when they saw when it came out and just wrote the check and said, I need to have one. When the car arrived and they drove in it, they were like, that was like a little bit of a disappointment. Aston Work Service thought about like, okay, what can we do? And a proven recipe they already had tried out with the Vantage before is like, okay, let's also put a 6.3 liter engine in it. 1990 was when the Virage came out. So this means that the base car was built in 90, and then sometime after, which we don't know exactly when, it was upgraded by the factory, which is what often happened. Now, one of the things which stayed the same, the 6.3 were all finished black. Once you open the hood and you see that black engine, you know, okay, this is like the big brother. They kept that kind of style the same way for the Virage. Once they dropped the 6.3 liter in, that now too benefited from all the modification of the fuel injection and so forth, and it was like close to like 500 horsepower. So that was a huge increase from 330 to 500. I mean, it's like almost doubled. So that required some serious reworking of chassis, suspension, wheels, tires, brakes, bodywork. As you look around the car, you just see how serious it is. I mean, the size of front wheels, I don't even know if I know any other car which has that size front tires. The brakes were like, if I remember correctly, the biggest brakes ever put on a street car at the time. Because, to slow this car down from like 180 miles to 2 tons in like a hurry, you need some serious grip. And when you look at the 6.3 compared to the regular car, it has a much more menacing stance. The Virage, when it came out, was almost like kind of really flying under the radar. It was like really understated in its design purity. The 6.3 just went like, just became like a Bulldog. The car had really big OZ split rims that then required to have the fender come out quite a bit, and it got an extra spoiler on the boot, like a bolt-on spoiler. In the end, this car not being supercharged like the later version, this car being a natural aspired V8 Aston Martin with close to 500 horsepower, completely hand-built, is the last of the greats. And while these cars are very underappreciated because a lot of people could like not get friendly with the look of it, I would think that in like another 2-3 decades, just because of where they were technologically, it will be very, valuable cars. And I personally love the restrained look. A lot of people thought they looked bland or something. I just love the understatement of it. And it's weird, and this is for me what makes Aston Martin. The regular Virage base model, which I had, I often experienced that people would stop at a light and would ask what it is. They wouldn't know what it is. So the car had presence, but not because it was a red Ferrari, but just because of what it is with itself. And this has like a combination. It's like understated, but brutal at the same time. And for me, that was always the magic, which was Aston Martin. Later on, once they reworked the entire Virage series, they then supercharged the cars. They took the normal 5.3 liters and supercharged them, and they got like the V550 out of it, which was 550 horsepower. And at the end of the game, even like the V600, which had like some awesome 600 horsepower and 600 foot of torque. And that was the final big V8 which came out. But this Virage with a 6.3 liter was like the last of the big, super powerful, naturally aspirated cars. I would have thought that like the fuel injection delivery would have been slightly more precise, but maybe it was because the Virage was not as dialed in as the Vantage. I couldn't really see any kind of difference. I mean, like the Vantage was like not any less responsive than this one. Both cars are incredible. For me, so many warm memories came back, like all the smells, the feelings, every little thing. The sound, both of them, the delivery, it was just absolutely exhilarating. Despite these two cars being basically 13 years apart, 1977 to 1990, there are a couple of things which, still are very similar or felt the same. I mean, back in those days, Aston Martin had not the money to kind of like develop brand new cars. And when they came out with the Virage, it was a little bit of a dinosaur already when it came out. I mean, it was like it was still handmade and like, all classic, the chassis and like. So driving both cars, they're both 5-speed dogleg. They'll feel very much the same. They'll have pretty much the same clutch going on. That part makes it feel very similar. However, I know that the Virage is basically here at Autosport under construction, meaning there are like a bunch of things which have to be done to the car in order to bring it really up to the level. And this car here is dialed in. I drove the Virage first, and it took me a little bit getting used to it. I needed to get into the groove a little bit. And I thought it was just me, having not driven one every day for a while. But it was great. So once I got the hang of it, it was like a fantastic driving experience, and I loved every minute of it, and the sound and the punch. The Virage is great. However, once I got into this car, I realized how well this car is dialed in. I mean, it drove just like a car. If I compare this in my mind, my V8 Vantage from '89 was one of the last years. Furthest developed, it was an X-Spec, and it was dialed in incredibly. I got that certified by people from Aston Martin Work Service, from Richard Williams, from Nicholas Mee. Anybody who drove my car said, like, listen, you're really lucky because yours is like kind of absolutely spot on. Now this car is a 1977 car, so that's like quite a few years earlier. But then again, it was upgraded to full Vantage specs and to the 6.3 liter. So was my driving experience like the 6.3 liter is like so much better than the 5.3? Honestly, I can't say. I don't know. I probably should have taken the car on the German Autobahn, punching it in between like 130 and 170 miles. That would really tell me, you know, kind of like what was going on. Here on the country roads, power level certainly felt like my old car. So I think there was like no shortcoming. I mean, did it feel like 50 horsepower more? I don't know. Are you supposed to feel like exactly 50 horsepower more? It drives awesome. And if I should say which one was better, the, you know, carbureted classic Vantage versus the fuel injected Virage, both in 6.3 liters, it's hard to say. I really would have to like come back when the Virage is put all together and drive that one more time. But for now, I love those cars. They're my favorite, both of them, and I wouldn't mind having both of them in the garage next to each other.